Hello, I'm Vicki LaRoe with Create and Adorn. Thank you for joining me for this quick tutorial video for today. We are going to focus on doing wire loops for making a chain link. So there's two types of wire loops, what we call a basic loop and a wire wrapped loop. And so here's our little basic loop that I'm going to keep making this chain that just has a little basic loop at the top. Here's an earring, right, that we just made, right? Basic loop at the top, really common. And then there's also our wire wrapped loops. So that's when there's a loop and then a wire wrap that links this together. And we could also use that technique for an earring. There's a loop and a wire wrap for our earring. So the difference is generally determined by the gauge or thickness of the wire you're using. That will generally determine the type of loop you need to make. There's another video in this series that will go through all the logistical things about all the different tools, all the different wire, different gauges, hole sizes. So we're not going to do that too much in this video. We're just going to focus on making the loops to make a link. And but that's how you determine which type of loop you need, would be by the size of wire you're using, which is generally determined by the size of the hole in the bead that you're using. So this one that has the basic loop, these are glass pearls. In a glass pearl, the hole is drilled larger because they're man-made. So I can use a thicker wire. With a thicker wire, normally to me is 20 gauge and up, I can do just a basic loop. The wire's thick enough, heavy enough to hold that. If I'm using a freshwater pearl or semi-precious stone, the holes are drilled much smaller and we need a thinner gauge wire. In this case 24, but 22, 24, 26, anything thinner like that. The wire's too thin at that point to hold a basic loop. So we need a loop and a wrap on it so that it's secure and stays in place. But when we're linking them together, you have to link it on before you close it. So they link a little differently. So that's why I wanted to do a separate video for them. So let's do our basic loop first. Here's a little piece of 20 gauge wire. You generally don't need more than 3 or 4 inches, not even that, probably 2 or 3 inches, depending on the size of the little component you're trying to make. But I'm going to bend a little piece down that's about 1/2 inch, maybe a little less, right? The little piece of wire we bend over, kind of try to visualize that round. So the longer, this is going to be your loop. So the longer that piece of wire is, the bigger your loop is going to be. The shorter it is, the smaller your loop is going to be. I would, especially when you're starting, try for like 1/2 inch, just under. You can use a little ruler even to measure it, because you can always cut it down if it's too large for some reason. But you can't add it back once you've cut it. So about 1/2 inch or so. Then I'm going to turn that little piece of wire pointing towards me. And I'm going to use my round nose pliers. One's completely rounded. I'm going to line this up about 1/4 inch up on the plier. Right, your round nose pliers is smaller at the tip and gets fatter towards the box joint. So you're going to line it up along the plier depending on how big you want your loop to be. And oftentimes, as if you start making a lot of jewelry, there's kind of a general size you make over and over again. You could always mark that with a Sharpie on your pliers, if that helps. So with my palm facing out, with my plier, I've got that piece of wire pointing towards me. I'm going to line it up about 1/4 inch or so, 1/3 of an inch up on the plier, but I'm at the very, very tip of that piece of wire that's pointing towards me. I want to be at that very tip. And in just a second, I'm going to roll this away from me in one kind of roll to make that loop. Before I do that, with my non-dominant hand, I need to put my thumbnail in that bend to hold it there so that when I roll it, I don't lose it. So I'm going to roll this over, ideally in one loop, but not always, and that doesn't matter. So as long as it comes out looking like your loop. And the wire is very forgiving, very flexible. Whatever you have to do to get it in there and play with it, you can do. This is a German silver wire. Like I said, I'll go over different wires in a different video. But this is an excellent wire not just to learn on, but for all your jewelry making. It's beautiful. So there's our basic loop. Then I'm going to string on a little section of beads to make our section, our component. Crystal and a little spacer and a glass pearl and another spacer and another crystal. Okay, so let's say that's our little component or section. We're going to link those together. So we're going to make another loop on the other side, and our goal is to have that loop be the same size and shape as the first side, ideally, right? So unlike that when we started on the first side of wire where we bent over, you can bend this first if it's just more comfortable for you to bend. I like to cut first. It literally doesn't matter what order you do it in. I could bend this, then cut it. I like to cut first when I can. So again, this is about a 1/2 inch or so. You can always measure it in a ruler, especially when you're making a link like this. We really want them to try to come out as close as possible as being consistent, and that just takes practice. So this is a great way to practice these loops. I'm going to cut that wire. And when I did that, I bent the component over, hang on to the beads so that I didn't lose the beads, but also so that the wire didn't hit somebody in the eye. Now, with my chain nose pliers, the flat one, I'm going to keep it right against the beads, and I'm going to bend it right back towards me in the same direction, the same plane as the first loop on the other side. So let me give you a good shot of that, right? So that loop is looking right, we're looking right at it. So our piece of wire we bent over needs to bend in the same plane. Now, I use my chain nose to bend it. You could also just push it over with your thumb, whatever works best for you. Then I'm going to turn so that wire's pointing towards me. Got my round nose pliers. Again, I'm going to line it up, the very tip of that piece of wire, same place on the plier, thumbnail in that little bend, and I'm going to roll and roll until it's closed. And like I said, if it doesn't, get there on that first, that would be really uncommon for it just to take that one roll. Get there as far as you can, and then you can get in there and tweak it and play with it, maybe get in there to close it a little bit more, whatever you need to do, right? So you've got the loops on both sides. Then if we're going to connect it to our chain link, we're then going to open one of the loops back up. When we open these links, we never stick the nose of the plier back in it. It would distort our loop. So we just open it to the side. I call it kind of opening and closing the door. You're going to use your chain nose pliers, and I'm going to just tweak it open a little bit like that. And I'm going to hook on that little link, this little row that I started, and I'm going to close it right back up, right back in place. And I would just keep going with those. And again, this wire is thick enough, it's 20 gauge, it's hardy enough to hold just that basic loop. And as long as they're closed, they're going to hold beautifully. And it's a good size wire. You use less wire when you do a basic loop. It's faster. So it's really nice to use it. Now, however, if we're using freshwater pearls or a gemstone or something with a smaller hole, then we need to use a thinner gauge wire. And when we do that, we have to do a wire wrap, a loop with a wrap. So I am using freshwater pearl, and I'm going to use a 24 gauge wire. I'm going to straighten it just a little bit. You don't need to straighten it much. Okay. So the first side, it's a little bit different. I'm going to come down about 1.5 inches or so on that wire. Only maybe 1 inch or so is fine. And bend that piece right over, just like that. Looks like a little L, about 1 inch. I'm going to take my round nose pliers, palm facing out, same place on the plier, but I'm going to line that up about 1/4 inch from the bend, right? So it's going to be towards me. Wire towards me, palm facing out, about a 1/4 inch towards the bend. What you're trying to visualize is the pliers should really be where the top of the loop will be. If I roll this, where will the top of the loop be? That's where our pliers needs to be. Before I roll it, I'm going to take the thumbnail of my non-dominant hand, very important that this bend is in there, and I'm going to roll halfway and stop. What I want to see is half a loop. Right, I want to see half a loop there. And if it's not, if I've lost my bend or my loop's too big, I can play with it a little bit, right? The wire, again, very forgiving, very flexible, but we want to get it so it's half of our loop and it's shaped really well. When we have it there, we're going to put the plier right back in, like we never took it out. That little tail that's under here, I'm going to, with my non-dominant hand, I'm going to pull the plier onto the wire. So this dominant hand's not going to do anything. I'm going to pull this wire over and cross it to complete my loop. So when I pull it out, right, that little tail crosses right where the bend is. So if you go to do that and pull it out and it's not crossing where the bend is, it just means you didn't grab it where the right place in the plier. But very easy to adjust. Just stick it back in and play with it. But this is where we want to be. We want to have that tail crossing right where the bend is. Then we're going to do our wraps. I'm going to turn this so the loop is pointing to my left, which is my non-dominant side, and the wire's pointing to the ceiling. I'm going to take the chain nose pliers, the flat one, in my non-dominant hand, holding it straight up and down. I'm going to place the plier over this loop, not in it, over it as a way to hang on to it. Then I can let go with my dominant hand and I can make this wrap. So I'm going to wrap around this piece of wire just a couple times. It doesn't need to ever be longer than 2 or 3 times. And you can use your hands. I use the other pliers to hang on to it because I think it gives me more control. But whatever works well for you. There's 1. There's 2 and a bit. Done. It does not need to be more than that. Then with that little tail that's there, I'm going to take my cutters and get as close as I can to cut that in. So especially with the fine wire, you really want a cutter that's a fine wire cutter that cuts sharp all the way to the tip. Most side cutters look like this, where they're rounded, and they'll work, you just can't get it quite as close. Now, if you have a little burr of wire, like even after you cut it, you feel it, you can get in there with your chain nose pliers, or I use the top of a crimping plier to just tuck that down. Then we have our loop with a wrap. Now the difference is we can't open this now, right? So I'm gonna show you how we're gonna attach it. I'm gonna string on a little section of beads here. Again, stop using a freshwater pearl, so the hole's smaller, so we wanna fill the hole in the bead as much as possible. Okay, so there's our freshwater pearl with our crystals and our components and everything there, right, our 24 gauge wire. So from this side, once the beads are on, we're going to make the WireWrapped loop on the other side. It's important they're going the same direction or on the same plane. So I'm gonna line my chain nose pliers up right above the crystal and right at the very tip of that chain nose pliers. Just like the round nose, the chain nose pliers gets fatter towards the box joint. And this is going to determine the size of our neck. So the further up the plier we are, the longer that neck is where the wrap is going to go, and the more wraps you would need to fill it. And so not only will that take more wire, more time, it won't look as nice. It really only needs to have 2 or 3 wraps to be secure. But also in the case of this design where we're trying to create a linked chain, you want them to match, right? You want this number of wire wraps to be the same on both sides. So this is really where it's going to take practice to getting it consistent. But the very tip of that chain nose is where we want it to be, short neck. Take the index finger of my non-dominant hand, I'm going to push that wire over the plier. So when I pull the plier away, I have my neck. That's the neck where the wrap is going to be. Okay. So first I'm going to make the loop. So just like we did on the other side, I'm going to line that up about 1/4 inch away from that bend, right? In the same place I was in the plier. My thumbnail goes in that bin so I don't lose it. And I'm going to roll halfway and stop. And I'm going to pull my plier out to make sure I have half a loop. If I don't, or I don't like the shape of it, I'm going to get in there and play with it. Now this wire's thinner, be gentle with it. So I've got a nice shape there. Once I like that, I'm going to stick the nose of my plier right back in like I never took it out. I'm going to grab onto this big piece of wire and pull it under the plier to complete my loop. When I pull it out, I'm going to make sure that that tail of wire crosses right where my bend is. Another thing at this point to make sure, or to look at, is if both of our loops are the same size. And if they're not, like if this is, mine's just slightly larger, I can get in there and still adjust it and make it a little bit smaller if I want, by just tweaking it down. So, okay. So once I have that though, this is generally where we would start wrapping. However, we need to hook it onto something first. Because once I close this, I can't hook it onto anything. Or I can't hook it onto this chain link. So I'm going to take my link, I'm going to string that over and pull it past that wire. And now we're connected. And now I'm going to do that wrap that it's connected. I'm going to take my chain nose pliers in my non-dominant hand, straight up and down, over that loop, even though now it has the whole link of my piece hanging. Wires, straight up and down, whoops. Make sure I've got a good grip on it. Then I can start doing this wrap. You can use your hands. I like using the pliers. But you're just going to wrap to fill the neck that you made. Hopefully it's not more, like I said, 2, 3. So it matches the other side. And get in there with your cutters. Cut the tail off. Beep. Use crimping plier or chain nose pliers to tuck that little tweak down if you need to. If you have a little burr. And there we are. And we're all linked together. Right? And it's really pretty. WireWrapped link is really pretty. We've done many, many designs with it. And so I have used even on these pearls too. Because the freshwater pearl has a thinner hole, so you need to do that link. But it's also very pretty. If you forget to link it on, well, you have lots of earrings. And everyone does that when they're learning. So no train smash. You can always just do it over. It's just wire. That's the beauty about making your own jewelry. And there we are, done with another point or another part of this wire series. Thanks so much for joining me. Check out the rest of the videos in this series and go out there and sparkle brightly like the star that you are. Mwah! Thank you. Peace.